Welcome back to Schmattz Outdoors, everyone. Today we're going to show you how I'm making some adjustable cable drowners. I kind of come up with the thought over the summer that it's tough to find the exact length of cable that you want to be making, for each specific spot. So what I have done in the past is I've made cable drowners for particularly beaver trapping, a little bit for mink trapping last year, and we're going to get into that a little more this year, and we'll get into that a little more in the video here too. But so primarily for beaver trapping, sometimes some sloughs, depending on where you could get your set put in, I think I have some as long as 25 feet long, a cable drowner. I have a couple sloughs in particular that I've used them in that are, super shallow and sandy bottoms, and in locations I typically can't get right next to the beaver houses. So in those particular spots, I'm trying to get 25 feet out just to get me to 3 feet of water to actually make sure I'm drowning the animals. So, and then I have them all the way right now built from 7.5 feet all the way up to 25 feet. Like I said, I think I got two 25 footers, a couple 20 footers, a handful 15 footers, some 12 footers, and then I think I got 9.5s and 7.5s. Are kind of the standard lengths that I use. But again, not every location will one of those lengths work. So got in my head that it'd be nice if I could make an adjustable drowner. What I've done in the past is I've played around with how I've staked both the top end and how I stake the bottom end, or use a brick or whatever, and that's part of it too. If I use a brick, what I do is I, use one of the holes in the brick and I wrap my cable around the brick and then thread it through itself and then up to the bank. Well, you do that, you're going to lose, on an 8-inch brick, you're going to lose 16 to 20 inches of cable just wrapping it around, a brick. So on a 7.5 foot drowner, you're down to 5.5 feet. So what I figured out, or what I thought about, is I wanted to make some adjustable drowners. So I went on the trappermen.com forums and I just posted it out there, how people make their cable drowners. I had a lot of comments on there on how to do it. So I've kind of pick and choose what I thought would work best for my situations here. I'm making a bunch of them, so we're gonna give them a good test this year, and we'll figure out what I think works and what doesn't work. And if you watch my out on the line videos, you'll most likely see some of these, and I'll probably give you my opinions of how they're working at that point. Today I am making both beaver and mink / raccoon drowners. I'm making two different lengths, two different kind of builds of them. There's not a lot of difference between the two. I'm building them pretty much the same way, but there are a few differences between the two different styles. And I'm going to show you what I'm doing different for the two species, and then explain a little bit why I'm doing it that way. Okay, so what I have set up here, cable spool, I'm using 3/32 cable, because again, it's my most popular. I use out for cable stakes, for coyote sets, raccoon sets, everything. I use a ton of 3/32. I buy it 1,000 feet at a time, just for projects like this, because I'm gonna burn through 200 feet of cable, I bet, just making all these drowners. Okay, I got the aluminum ferrules for them. I got aluminum stops, and I got the actual sliders. And right here I have the bigger size, the little longer size. I use these for beaver trapping, and then I have the little shorter size here that I use for mink trapping. Where'd that guy go? Okay, so I built 2 different beaver ones here, and I'm gonna show you what the differences are between the 2 beaver ones, and then over here I have a mink one. And we're gonna go over the difference between that, or go through each one, and then I'm gonna kind of real quickly show you how I'm assembling them. So, I guess before we go into too much detail of each individual one, right here is the key. Let's move this guy out of my way again. The key to my drowning setup is a snare lock. So this is a tooth snare lock. I don't know how well or if you guys are going to see the teeth. So it is a tooth snare lock. It's tough to get that to show up on camera, but it is toothed. My camera won't focus. There you go. So here you can kind of see the teeth on there. And this is set up, it's a little bit bigger size cam lock than like I would actually use on a coyote snare or anything like that. So I bought them specifically for this, and they're meant for 3/32 seconds cable. What I did is I cut a 15-inch length of the cable. Again, there's 3/32 second cable, and I used 2 double ferrules, you know, a double ferrule like this. So you wrap it, goes through once, and then you loop it, and you'll go through again. So I crimped the end on towards my snare lock a little bit tighter. I don't need a very big loop on that end because, you know, it shouldn't be moving around at all once it's staked. And then this end I left a little bit bigger loop, so it's, well, here I got a tape measure. So go from 36 inches, it's 1 1/8 that way, and it's probably, let's get it so you can see, 5/8 of an inch wide. I just want it big enough so I can run a T-bar stake through it, either a 1/2 inch or a 3/8 T-bar stake, but yet not so big that, you know, you could get it around a T-bar stake or whatever. But it also, I didn't want it, the bigger you make my loop, the shorter it's going to make my overall cable. I decided I wanted about 1 foot of cable. So if I start at 36 inches, you can see, well, if I get my cam lock shut here, this one here is like 11 3/4 inches long. So a 15-inch cable wrapped twice, you know, wrapped and crimped on this end and looped and crimped on that end, gives me roughly 1 foot. Some of them are, I got 2, I made 3 dozen. I already have some of these made. I'm making a dozen beaver drowners, so that's what I got. These 2 are 2 of the ones I've already made, and I'm making 2 dozen mink drowners, adjustable mink drowners. So, and again, I say mink, but it could be raccoons and muskrats, and, you know, maybe even an otter and possibly a beaver might be in them too. You know, you never know when you're making like pocket sets and stuff like that, what will get into it. So, but this is the key to my adjustability right there, is this little section of cable with a snare lock on the end of it. All right, so let's get into the actual drowner themselves. What I wanted to make is my beaver ones, I want them longer than I think I'll ever need. So with that in mind, I decided that for beavers, anything under 15 feet is a pretty standard depth. The 25 footers I have, you know, they're kind of custom for a couple particular sloughs that I've trapped beavers out of in the past. And I got a couple 20 footers already, again, for kind of the same type of locations. For most people, that'd be way excessive for anywhere you're trapping beavers. The reason why I use that long of a thing, the bank is so gradual right up to like a sandy beach that you couldn't like get a conibear. In Minnesota, they gotta be half submerged to set like a conibear on a caster mount set. So, and that's my primary set is caster mount sets for beavers. So I need the longer thing to get me to drown them because conibears won't work in a situation like that. So I figured out that 15 feet should cover me for any of the locations that I'm trapping. For the vast majority of the locations I'm trapping, I may need, again, a couple of those longer ones for those particular sloughs, but I already have some built for those. So I went 15 feet. That's what I started with for a cable, but you're going to lose a little bit with your 2 loops, so it's probably going to end up being closer to like 14.5 feet by the time I'm done, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And the way the cable lock or the snare lock is set up on there, you actually gain roughly a foot anyway, and I'll show that to you here too. So what I did for the deep end of them is I just crimped a loop on there. So the deep end, I just crimped a loop, again roughly the same size as I have a loop on the end of my snare lock, because there are times when I actually almost prefer to stake the deep end of my cables as well. So again, I wanted to make sure that I could get a T-bar stake through the deep end, or have it, you know, I want it small enough to fit over the T-bar without coming off, and then I can also hook like an 1/8 inch quick link to that, you know, and wrap it around a brick or do whatever I need to for the drowning end of it, the deep end. One thing that a few people suggested, so there's my end. They recommended putting a stop on your slide wire to keep your animal from sliding all the way to the very end of your cable, and basically be able to tangle around whatever you're using for a weight or your T-bar stake or anything, you know. So they recommend putting a stop on there. I don't know how far up the stop needs to be, so what I did is I crimped the end first. I slid this one on the stop, made the loop and crimped it, and then I measured from the end of there, and at 16 inches I crimped on the stop on my Beaver ones. I don't know if it should be farther than that, but I figure most, like I used Bridger number 5 coil springs. Those chains are only usually like 6 inches long, and then you got the length of the trap. Well, that only gets basically, so the trap still should never be able to get to and entangle up in whatever I am using for the holding method for the deep end of my cable stake. Okay, so it's just crimped on there. I just crimped it one time with my swager here. All the loop ends, I always crimp them all 3 times. Okay, for Coyote stake ends, you know, Berkshire stake ends, everything, I always 3 crimps, and I always make sure that my cable is sticking out the end. It's sticking out a little bit on the end here, past the ferrule when it's crimped. Like there, you can see the end is sticking out there. And I don't crimp typically right to that very end, so I leave it flared out a little bit. And I feel like that eliminates the chance of you ever pulling that cable back out of there. So, all right, on the shore end of my cable stake, or my drowner wire cable here, that's where I have the 2 different versions of my drowning cables I made. So the deep end is the same on both versions of the Beaver setup I got here. Alright, so here we got the slider, the drowner lock. So again, you'd slide that up to the top with your trap attached to this. Right here's my cable, or my snare lock on there. So what you need to make sure is that they're running opposite directions. So this one can slide down the cable, this one can slide freely up the cable, or slide down the cable as well. Let's see here, we're gonna try and get you set up so I can show you this a little better here. All right, so the drowner lock needs to slide down your cable, but so does my snare lock. My snare lock needs to be able to slide down the cable, because what I want to be able to do is pull my cable up until it gets tight to my weight on the deep end, which is the way that this should be running, towards the deep end. But if I pull up on the snare lock, it locks and it won't slide back up. So I should be able to stake the end of this one, the end of the snare lock one, stake that solid, grab this tail end and pull it until it gets tight to my weight down here on the deep end. And then this will hold it nice and tight. So there's no way that your thing is going to relax. So what you do end up with is this loop, the tail end. And what guys say they do is they just loop it up like that. So they just leave that on the bank or wherever you're next to where you're staked. And here's your stake end that's on the snare lock part of it. Okay. So snare lock should lock and not go towards the shore end, but it should freely slide down towards the deep end until you get your cable tight to your weight or stake or whatever you have on the deep end, and then it should lock. And you should preset that as tight as you can get your cable without it sliding your weight on the deep end. So this one here is built, that's exactly how it's built. This one here on the high end of the main cable. So here's my snare lock on there with the loop. On the end of this one, what I did is actually just crimped it on, and I left the loop the same size as all the rest so I can get a T-bar stake through there. In case I do need a 15-foot grounder, I can just stake the end, and this piece will just end up being on there and not used. Okay? The difference between that one and this one, so the two different versions of the Beaver, is that, just that, how the end of it is made. How the end of the main cable is made here. Okay? So right here's the snare lock one that I got in this hand. On this one, what I did is I made the top of this loop adjustable as well. So this is the main cable, the main grounder cable. What I did is I just stuck a double ferrule on there, but I did not crimp it, and I run it through to just a stop on the end here. So I just crimped a stop on the end and pulled that up tight to my double ferrule. But now what I can do is I can actually adjust the size of the loop on the top on this one. So if I am trapping like right around a beaver house where there's, you know, a cut off tree, or even trapping on the beaver house where you've got sticks sticking out of the beaver house, I can just stick this around one of those sticks and go shook and cinch her down tight to the stick. So I have the same type of setup on all like my, on the cables I made for my 330 conibears. So if I'm setting runs and stuff coming out of houses, I have a 6-foot cable attached to my trap that I can hook and actually grab onto the house so they can't steal my trap and my H-stand. So like I said, this one's adjustable. If I wanted to stake it, I can pull it all the way down to that tight. You know, and I can still stake it with a T-bar stake on the end if I wanted to. But again, most of the time, you know, a very large portion of the time, the idea would be you would stake it with the adjustable thing and then pull up the slack. Because the only way this is going to work is you would have to have your weight 15 feet out using the full length of the grounder in order to use the adjustable end. So I'm not building them all adjustable like this for just that reason, because very rarely am I ever going to have I'm not going to have 15 feet exactly, you know, or enough to get 15 feet to put a weight or a stake or whatever on that end to be able to use the adjuster on this end. So, but I am building a few. I'm going to build, I think 3 out of the dozen I'm going to build with the adjustable end on there. The other 9 of the dozen are going to have just a normal crimp stake end, loop end like that on there with your adjustable slider on there. Okay? So that's the Beaver setup. The Mink, Raccoon, whatever you want to call it, setup is roughly the same. Though what I did for the cable here, so Beaver setups, I cut 15 inches or 15 feet of cable for the main run. It's probably going to end up about 14 and a half by the time you crimp loops on each end. The Mink / Muskrat / Coon ones, I cut them at 12 feet long. Because I figured mink, I do not need 3 feet of water to drown a mink. I need a foot to 18 inches of water. But there are some sloughs that I may need 10 plus feet of cable to get deep enough water to even get that much. The same sloughs that I need a 25 footer to drown, get a beaver out to 3 feet of water, I may need 10, 12 feet to get a mink out deep enough or a raccoon out deep enough to drown them as well. So I figured 12 feet, having too much is better than having them too short. So we're going to try 12 feet. If I want to shorten them, I could always just cut the loop off and cut off however much I want and then recrimp a loop on there. What I did on the end down here, so instead of the beaver ones, I have my stop at the end on the deep end at 16 inches. The mink one, I only went a foot because, again, I have pretty short chains on my mink trap because I also want, again, make sure that they can't get up to the top of the water. So I figured a foot should keep them out of my weight or whatever I'm putting on the end. And then on this end, again, I'm using the smaller slider. So you can see that one's only roughly an inch where these are 2 inches. You can see the difference between the two. So this is the beaver size, this is a mink size. They're just not as powerful, and they don't need the leverage that like a beaver does, to stop a beaver from sliding back up. So I'm using the smaller sliders. Again, I'm making 2 dozen mink ones, and this is how many I have left for the beaver ones that I'm going to make here. On the mink ones, I'm not making any of the tops adjustable. I don't feel like I'm going to have, the beaver house type of setup where you're going to have chewed off tree limbs or chewed off bushes where you're going to have a stump sticking up a ways in order to loop that onto. I just don't see that happening, so I'm just going to make it so I can stake the end if I want to. Otherwise, you're going to stake the cable lock or the snare lock. But then, like I said, if you look at it here, so this cable here, the main cable I made 12 feet long, this is roughly a foot more, so I could actually get almost 13 feet by staking the end of my cable lock, just because it's longer than the end of that cable. And the same thing applies. I want this grounder to be able to slide down. I want my snare lock to be able to slide down. But as soon as I go, let's see here, I'm trying to get my arm on the cable. As soon as I try to pull up, oh, I missed it. Trying to get so you guys can see. So as soon as I pull up, that snare lock grabs. Okay. So again, the idea is you put your weight out in the water however deep you want it, and then I could pull the tail end up until my snare until it gets tight. Most likely what I'll probably do is pull that up tight and hold this, and then actually hold this and then stake it to make sure that this is locked and everything's as tight as I can keep it without it pulling or sliding my weight at the end. Or pull, I want to make sure it's pulled tight to the stake at the end. Any slack you have in a cable grounder just gives the animal the opportunity to move, pull up and down on it, and to also not go all the way down and actually twist your cable up and stretch it. So that's where the adjuster, I think, is going to work pretty nice, because I make sure they're nice and tight every time. The tighter I can keep my cable to begin with, the more apt that slide is to just slide all the way right down to the end without getting caught up, in the loose cable or whatever. It should slide nice and easy down there. Because the holes in these are roughly 3/16 holes, when I'm running a 3/32 cable. So, I mean, it slides super easy on there. So the tighter you keep your cable, the easier that's going to slide. Hoping the adjusters are going to be that for me. So I was going to actually show you crimping one on camera here, but I think I pretty well explained it. Again, what I did is I just slid the stop on but didn't crimp it. Crimped the loop on the end and then measured that from the end of the loop to here, a foot, and then I just crimped the stop on. Again, I run it up, I put the I went to the other end, I put the drowning lock on there, put the snare lock on there, making sure it's slid on, fold this over, and swage the end of that. For these, I made all these ahead of time. Like I said, I just cut 36 15-inch cables, and I went through and I just crimped both ends of it. You know, I just make, what I try to do is I usually just make a pile of each one of the components, so I can just grab a ferrule, grab a snare lock, you know, make your loop, crimp it, grab another ferrule, crimp the loop on the other end, grab the next cable, and so on. Go set up sort of an assembly line. What I got here for the Beaver cables is right here are my cables. They're laying going out my door. They're 15 feet long. I got all dozen of them cut. I got a couple right here, and I got a couple made in the box here already. So, and then once I made one of the Mink size here, just so I could show you guys on camera what it's going to look like. What I'll do is I'll actually cut 23 more, because I'm going to make 2 dozen of them, 24 of them. I'll cut 23 more 12-foot cables all at once, cut the 12-foot cables and be done with it, and then I'll just start assembling them all once I got all the cables cut. So alright guys, if you guys got any suggestions, anything like that, if you make yours a little differently, or if you think I'm doing something wrong, that it's going to be a failure point on me here. Otherwise, yeah, leave your comments down below. If you do something differently, you know, try to explain it the best you can down below. And with that, I encourage you guys to read the comments, because, you know, again, people are going to be hopefully putting some information down below, or people ask me questions. A lot of times I answer them in the comments. So don't only read just the main comment. My little symbol should show up next to underneath there, and it'll show that I replied to it, and you can see my reply. And usually I try to explain things a little clearer in there if I didn't explain it well enough in the video. So I encourage you to just read through the comments. Usually there's not a lot of comments on my videos, so read through the comments. You might pick up a little tidbit there as well. Otherwise, I think that's all I got for you guys. I appreciate you guys watching Schmattz Outdoors.